Now it's time for Inspirational Women and my guest, Julia Brewer Daily, a former educator and now author. Her first book of historical fiction and part memoir is No Names to be Given. Julia takes us on a journey more than half a century ago, a time when young women who found themselves in the family way were sent away. The circumstances were akin to a secret mission, and that part of their life was edited out. However, as we've made progress with technology, those edits are now somewhat easily found, and Julia weaves all this into the book No Names to be Given. Let's meet Julia to have her fill in some of those edits for us. Julia Brewer Daily, good morning. Thank you so greatly for being with us today.
I'm so glad to be with you.
And, of course, thank you for writing a very compelling fictional book, but about adoption based on reality, based on what went on in the past, and based on some of the repercussions, what's going on today. Of course, let's start with beginning with your desire to tell the story because you have a very personal connection to it.
I do. It's fictional, as you said, but it has a thread of memoir running through it because I am an adopted child from a maternity home hospital in New Orleans, and my protagonist in the book meet at that maternity home hospital in New Orleans to relinquish their babies for adoption. So it all kind of ties together. I was adopted in the 50s, and I was taken to Mississippi and spent most of my life in Mississippi. My adoptive parents lived there, and I had a wonderful childhood. And they always told me that I was adopted. I think they began with little books to read to me when I was young, so I always knew I was one of the chosen children. But that's not always the case, and not everybody is told that they're adopted.
And from your perspective, does this seem like a wise path to take, to be honest and open up front about it?
I definitely think so. I think, a lot of people can get away with it for a while because our birth certificates are actually changed to reflect that our adoptive parents gave birth to us. So you don't see the original birth certificates. Those are closed records. And I think it would be difficult to trust anyone if your most basic self-information is not truthful. It has to be terribly disorienting if you find out, especially as an adult, that your whole life was a lie. And as a child, you pick up on so much, you perceive so much that's going on around you, even if you don't know what it is. You think that those secrets are about you.
Right. And just how harmful that can be to a child to just always feel that something is off in their life.
Yes, I think so too. When I was conducting research for my novel, I searched and found my own birth mother, and she had not told her sons that she had given up a child for adoption. So it was a shocking revelation to them.
And of course, that is the other side of it, is the birth mother and how to handle all of that information. So she hadn't told her son, but maybe she hadn't told her husband either.
Well, she had, but a lot of women have not, and that's been the most interesting part of my journey after writing this book, is that I've gotten to speak to so many around this complex subject of adoption. I've talked to birth mothers, I've talked to other adoptees, I've talked to adoptive parents, and, all of those are different perspectives and have different issues surrounding them. And a lot of the birth mothers have kept this a secret for so many years.
It must be such a challenge because it was at the time, and we're talking about the 50s and really into the 60s as well, this was still very much the norm. And so to be...
right?
Yes. Right, yes.
Yes, the women who were unwed, well, from the 30s up until about the 70s, actually, young women were shipped off to these maternity home hospitals. Um, they were told that they were going to visit an aunt or, take a European vacation. And they had all of these stories concocted. And the young women went away, and there was no possibility of them keeping their children. The societal mores back then, their families were shamed. It was definite, that they were going to give up a child for adoption.
And so gut-wrenching because, as you share in the book, you have the details, and we can really get the feeling of how wrenching that is to be giving birth and not even to have a glimpse, not have one single touch with this infant that you've carried for 9 months. It's just beyond belief.
Well, I hear from a lot of young women today that they can't even believe such as that happened. This is a part of our history in this country that people who didn't experience it cannot even fathom how you would give up your firstborn and to strangers and never be able to look back and never be able to say that you were a mother at all, to just hide that and those emotions so deep down into your psyche that, they can't come back to the surface.
And to think then jumping into the times we now live in and the opportunity for open adoption and having interviews to be able to even make a selection of who would be a good parent to this child that you need to give up. But having that kind of a choice and being able to maintain connections if you choose, what a different world.
It is a different world, and adoption is in the news, as you well know, talking about same-sex adoptive parents, adopting out of the culture. There's international versus in-country adoption. And I certainly hope that we can bring attention to the children in the foster care system who are waiting for homes, older children. There are more than 100,000 of them in the country, and that just breaks my heart. And we in my family have, of course, a real love for adoption. My oldest daughter had 2 birth children, and then she adopted 4. So we truly see that adopting older children is such a wonderful thing for families to be able to do.
Oh, that is wonderful. That had to really make your heart sing, basically, to have her do that.
It's really a full circle moment when that happens, and you see that I was adopted as a baby, and that was a totally different time, mostly white babies being given for adoption. And now for us to be able to adopt all cultures and for children to have families is very heartwarming.
And so these were closed adoptions, but of course, part of our advancing society and culture is that we have these DNA tests now. So more people have that opportunity and maybe get a shock as to what goes on. But you very deliberately did your research or did the DNA testing to find your birth mother.
Well, when I searched and found my birth mother, that was many years ago. And at the time in Louisiana, there was still a Napoleonic law on the books that said that an adopted child could inherit from their natural parents. Well, you can't inherit from your natural parents if you don't know who they are. So that was a little loophole that allowed me to get into the records, to go to the Bureau of Records and to request that original birth certificate. And luckily, my birth grandmother was still living at that address where my birth mother had lived, and I was able to contact her and get in touch with my birth mother. Now, many years later, when these DNA gift tests became available for us, I did my DNA results and found my birth father's side of the family as well. Unfortunately, he had passed away about 30 years ago, but I did receive a message from that DNA result company, and my heart stopped for a moment when an email came through, and the subject line read, "Are you my sister?" That will get your attention. And sure enough, we're half sisters by my biological father.
And how were these reunions, both with your half brother and now with the half sister?
Well, I had good experiences. My birth mother informed her sons about me, and I met them, and they were shocked, but they were, happy to meet me. And my birth mother and I had a good relationship until her death. It was not the mother-daughter relationship. Many years had passed. My adoptive parents are my parents, and she became a good friend. And I think that's what most people find when they search, is that those bonds are there, but they're not the mother-child bond that some may hope for. And I think you have to be prepared for that when you conduct your search.
Is that, yes, that there's not necessarily going to be a real strong connection, but being a friend is a wonderful thing.
It really is. And my adoptive parents were supportive, and they said, families have lots of love to give, and we'll just incorporate, that side of the family as well. You have family A and family B, and there can even be family C, and we all get along, and so that's worked out well for me.
Right. And we even see it being used as a subject in movies now. I'm thinking back to one over the holidays that on Hallmark that had a young woman finding her birth family, and it's really touching. This was a great connection, and I think to show that that good things can happen where you can really build, just a greater circle of family and friends is very positive and uplifting.
Well, it is, and I tell everyone, I advise everyone who wants to search, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst, because best case, the family member will want to get to know you. Worst case, you're rejected, and that hurts. But there's a very significant reason that a mother relinquishes a child for adoption. And there are very few states with open records, and so some of those situations may stay buried for reasons that you may never know. And a large percentage of adoptees never search. They're just not interested. I think for birth mothers, it certainly would have to bring some closure to know if their child has had a good life. My birth mother was worried that she had given me to a family who might have abused me. You see all of those terrible news items on television, and you think, did my child end up in a situation like that? So, birth mothers are carrying a lot of grief and a lot of pain on their end that hopefully adoptees are not, and had a good childhood.
Right. And hopefully, too, where there is the connection and your birth mother hoping that you had a good home, that helps to bring some closure, and maybe it's been a little bit of a wound inside that finally can be healed, and she could move on and feel good about that.
And that's what she said, and I think that really was helpful for her to get to know me. And, it is shocking and comforting at the same time to see someone who truly looks like you, although everyone said that my adoptive father looked just like me. And so I worried all those years that he might be my actual father, and my poor adoptive mother was having to bring up this child of his indiscretions, but that wasn't the case. That was just my imagination as a child.
Uh, your creativity as a writer was already beginning at those young age.
Absolutely. And I actually took a writing course many years ago and wrote a couple of chapters that ended up in this book. You know, if I had written this story back when I found my birth mother, that was before anyone was searching. You didn't open a magazine and see all these reunions or see adoption anywhere. It was a hush-hush kind of society. And it would have been a blockbuster, you know, back then. Now, every book seems to have a little thread of adoption running through it. So that's been very interesting to me to see how it's being worked into so many books and movies now.
Well, yours is a very interesting book because you have three young women who ended up in this maternity home together and you followed their life from that time. So we really have an insight as to what the situation was in this country at that time. So I think that gives it one of the natural kind of differences than we would normally find.
Yes, and I talked to my birth mother about being in the maternity home and found out a lot of information from her. But I've also talked to other birth mothers. In fact, one who relinquished her son for adoption in the 60s in that same maternity home. And so I got to, get information from her as well to make sure that I was on the right path in describing what a maternity home hospital would be like in those days.
And so you're again mentioning the research that you did. Was that challenging to find the people to actually interview? How did you go about getting that information?
Well, of course, the internet is our friend now. Writers can Google just about anything and find people and people who are searching, for a child or searching for a family or trying to find records. And that maternity home hospital in New Orleans actually has a Facebook group of adoptees who are looking for their birth parents or birth parents looking for adoptees. And so that's been a good source of information for me.
I guess, of course, that would make sense. It just, kind of juxtaposing having a Facebook page versus, 50, 60 years ago and being so secretive and wanting everything to be so hush-hush. What a contrast.
It really is. And, I think technology does make reunions possible. 100 million Americans have adoption in their immediate families, and 7 million of us alive today are adoptees. And I think that's, a significant number. And so it seems like almost every family in the country is affected by adoption in some way.
And I think at one time, though, well, at least there was the openness that families did share in many cases that the child was adopted. But was there still actually a stigma around it?
Well, when I was adopted, one of the stories in the book from one of the adoptees' points of view is an actual story. My grandmother and aunt were pushing buggies with us. My first cousin and I were only a month apart. I was adopted. She was a birth child. And they were pushing us downtown. And it's such a small town. This woman walked up and said, "I want to see that baby." And my grandmother held up my cousin. She said, "No, I want to see that adopted baby." And my mother said it was like she thought I would have horns coming out of my head. So, people were very intrigued by adopted children. And when I think back, I think how brave my parents were at that point to bring a child who was not their blood child into their home and to rear me as their own. That took a lot of a lot of bravery, I think, back in that day and time in a small town.
Yes.
And I'm forever grateful for that.
And were you raised then as an only child?
No, the old adoption syndrome happened. They were told they would never be able to have a child, so they adopted me. And 19 months later, my brother was born, and 10 years later, my sister.
I I know people who have had that syndrome, yes, which is amazing. Actually, neighbors, when you mentioned the variety of adoptions, neighbors of ours had a daughter and then couldn't have other children, and they adopted internationally. So they had a beautiful home with
Yes.
7 children, and then all of a sudden they had another child. So
Yes, and that has happened in my own family with my daughter, and they have 6 children, all different colors and nationalities, and now they're all American kids. So it's worked out beautifully.
And I can't help but comment then, because I'm thinking of the neighbors, but with your daughter as well, that isn't this just a beautiful example of what our world could be, how we could have this kind of connection and harmony and live a great life all together.
I believe so, and I think we're going to stop looking at skin color and worrying about adopting out of the culture. There are a lot of naysayers about things like that, and certainly you want to honor a child's culture and to be able to maybe take them back to the country where they were born and let them, have some cultural aspects. But, those children were on the streets in their country, or they were, in a bad situation. And to have them have a strong, loving home, to me, is just everything. And I've seen it in our own family. A loving family can heal a lot of wounds and a lot of trauma that a child has gone through.
Exactly. So, yes, we definitely want to support adoption whenever and however possible. And part of it being from the foster care system, because as you mentioned earlier, Julia, how there's such a great need. Often it is older children who really desperately need a home. And to me, I think we see those children who do not get into a good family, they end up being the victims on the streets. A lot of our homeless population that is just it doesn't know where to go.
Yes, and that just breaks my heart every time I see a story about children being on the street. And one of my grandchildren, who was adopted from Colombia, South America, when he was 16. And he was about to be placed on the street out of the children's home where he had been living, because they had to age out of the children's home. And he didn't even know anything about money or how to make it on those streets. Can you imagine? I mean, it just horrifies me to think of him having to exist by himself out there, and now he's a member of our family.
Oh, isn't that beautiful? What a wonderful story. Great encouragement for any of us to really consider that. And I'm sure that, there are times that it can be a challenge, but to know that having this open heart, open home, welcoming home, it can be so healing for a better future.
It really is. And, a lot of people are concerned about taking older children into their families, especially if they've been through a lot of trauma and had a terrible childhood. But, I say in my book that some people will say, well, you don't know what you're going to get when you adopt. And I always say to them, do you know what you're going to get when you have your own? Because I had 3 birth children, and they're not like they're even cousins. I wonder where they came from, because they're totally different from each other, and they grew up in the same house. So I don't know if you can say that even your own birth children, that you'll know what you're going to get until you get them.
It's so true. Definitely. So this is really a very wonderful, and I'm going to say a timely book, even though you say there is so much more around us that is on the subject of adoption. But I think having the weaving of these three young women, their life and their future and how it all comes together is definitely intriguing, I'll say. And, we can learn so much, and it helps to open up our heart. So we can get more information, of course, from your website. So let's mention that, Julia.
Yes, it's www.juliadaily, and daily is spelled D-A-I-L-Y, just like dailynewspaper.com. And they can view my book there, and I do have resources on that site concerning adoption.
Yes, lots of great resources, which is a good reason to visit that. Also, you have a presence on Instagram and Facebook, so people and Twitter, so people can find you there as well.
Yes, that's been fun to get to know the social media world through my book.
Yes. So, No Names to Be Given is the novel based on a lot of actual research, actual true life stories, but put into this not fictional situation.
Exactly.
Right. So as you have finished this project, do you look at another one now, or perhaps you're in the midst of one?
Well, I have my second book already written. It is about a female heir to the largest ranch in Texas who finds an ancient people living on her property. So it's not the adoption, but I've become intrigued living in Texas now with these ranches here, and I went to Mesa Verde National Park in Colorado and saw these gorgeous ruins that an ancient people built, and I was intrigued enough to make that the topic of my next book.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Very interesting. Historical fiction really is, I find, quite wonderful to read. So do we expect that to be coming out, what? It takes a while for publishing.
In
August. Well, that is coming up.
In August of this year, yes. So that'll be another fun book. I think people are interested in contemporary Westerns now, with the television shows like Yellowstone being so popular. So it'll be interesting to see how it does in the marketplace.
Absolutely. I can't imagine, but that it'll be just grabbed up, as I hope that is the case with No Names to Be Given, because it is, as we've been talking about for the last half hour, about adoption and the need and the history and just the greater awareness, all that we can learn and become as a result of it. So this has been so wonderful to connect with you, Julia Daily.
Thank you so much. It's been a great visit.
And I wish you even more writing projects that we'll delight in.
Thank you.
This brings us to the end of a very full hour of Inspirational Women with Julia Daily and Sunday Morning Magazine with Elaine Park. I'm Kate Daniels, your host, and I greatly appreciate your sharing this hour with me and these special guests. For details you might have missed or information you'd like to know, please just send me an email, kated@warm1069.com, and I will get right back to you. Also, if you'd like to listen again or share these important stories with your family and friends, find the podcast on our Warm 1069 webpage. Just click on the podcast tab, then either of the show names, and then look for the guest names. I now wish you and your family a day of seeing ourselves and each other as the positive change we want to see in the world. Have a week of the same, and then please plan to join me again next weekend for another hour of Sunday Morning Magazine and Inspirational Women on Warm 1069. Good morning.